So today is November 20th, and we've officially reached the end of the window, the Rapture window for 2024. So if you've been following my channel for any length of time, we've got a dog here. Yeah, a little Brooke. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I've been studying the book of Revelation as well as many other end time prophecies. And what I've come up with is a template, which is an order of events according to how I read things in the book of Revelation and these other passages. And just about every eschatology teacher has some kind of timeline, some kind of order of events that the rapture should happen, and then there's the confirming of a covenant, or the abomination of desolation taking place at a certain time, and then 1,260 days later is the second coming of Christ, and so on. So it's not unusual for anyone who teaches eschatology or is investigating this to have a timeline. So I have one too, and it's an order of events. And because I calculate this timeline backward from the second coming of Christ, the second coming of Christ will be on a feast day. Because the feast days are prophetic, it will be on the Day of Atonement in some year. And then we just subtract 1,260 days. We'll arrive at the day of the abomination of desolation. And all the dates and day counts in Revelation are worked from basically the second coming of Christ on the Day of Atonement in some year. So there are people who accuse me of coming up with new dates every year and just changing when the rapture is going to take place and all of that. And the thing is it's a template. So if the rapture doesn't happen this year, we move on to next year. But it's the same order of events. None of that changes. None of the feast days or days when the rapture could take place, none of that changes. It's all the same from year to year. So the template stays the same, even though the dates may change because we're now in a new year. If I strictly used the Hebrew dates, none of those dates would ever change. But I use the Gregorian date that goes with that Hebrew date, and that does change from year to year. But as far as the Hebrew dates go, none of those ever change, ever. It's always the same. The template is the same no matter what. But because we're using Gregorian dates in our calendar, the common way that most of us Westerners calculate time, those dates will change. So all dates are calculated from the Day of Atonement going backward. The Day of Atonement is when Christ, our great high priest, after the order of Melchizedek, both a king and a priest, that's when he's going to exit the heavenly temple, not as a priest, but as a king, because he's after a different order than the Aaronic priesthood. So the other thing that I've discovered along the way is that certain events take place on the same day. And so they're useful for calculating other events. Like the sixth trumpet, that hour, day, month, and year, that's tied to the hour of trial that comes on the whole earth. It's tied to the hour that the two witnesses ascend, the hour that Mystery Babylon is judged, the hour and the day that we see the harlot being destroyed. That's the same hour, okay? And that hour is the sixth trumpet, also known as the second woe. What else happens on the day of the second woe? Well, it's the day the two witnesses ascend. It's the day the remnant of Israel flees into the wilderness. It's the day of the abomination of desolation, even though the abomination of desolation is never actually mentioned in the book of Revelation. But it is mentioned in other passages of the Bible, and so it figures into this timeline as well. But this same day, the abomination of desolation is also known as the sixth trumpet. It's also the second woe. So we have to understand that there's different words that are being used for this same day, referring to different things that take place on this one day. There are people who will say to me, well, Brenda, nobody knows the day or the hour of the rapture. Nobody knows the day or the hour. And that particular accusation is actually fairly easily debunked, because the day and hour that nobody knows is actually in answer to the question that the apostles were asking in the beginning of Matthew 24, which was, when was Jesus going to set up his kingdom? What is the sign of your parousia, that is your presence to set up the kingdom, and the end of the age, that is the end of this age and the beginning of the millennial age? That's the question the disciples had. They wanted to know, when was Jesus going to usher in his kingdom? And Jesus said that nobody knows the exact day of that, but there are going to be signs for it. There's going to be signs for the day of the Lord. It's going to happen after the abomination of desolation, after the tribulation of those days, about the time that the sun goes dark and the moon turns to blood and the sign of the Son of Man appears in heaven. That's the day that nobody knows, but there is going to be a sign for it. The rapture is not necessarily a day that nobody knows when it's going to be, especially not the first rapture. We actually have a very good window of time for when that will be. The second rapture of the 144,000, we know exactly when that one is going to take place. But the third rapture, the one where Jesus comes on a cloud and harvests people from the earth that we read about in Revelation 14, we don't know exactly when that one is going to be. But again, we have a window of time. It's after the abomination of desolation, but before the glorious visible return of Christ to the earth. And it's going to be before the wrath of God is poured out in the 7 bowl judgments. So I get emails all the time, tons of emails. And, a lot of you have emailed me and you're asking some of these same questions, including, am I using the right calendar? Am I 100% sure, positive that I'm using the right calendar, the right Hebrew calendar, God's calendar? Because if I'm using the wrong calendar, obviously I'm going to end up on the wrong Gregorian dates. There are a lot of Hebrew calendars out there, and that's kind of a tricky question too, because it's tricky to try to figure out, are we using the right calendar? And God knew that this stuff would be messed up by the time it gets to us. So he has made provision for us to have some kind of confirmation that we're using the right calendar. So there's a lot of calendars out there. There's the Essene calendar, the Enoch calendar, the Torah calendar, the Creator's calendar, where the full moon is used instead of the new moon for calculating the beginning of the months. There's people who calculate the beginning of the year according to where the sun is in constellations. There's people who calculate the new year according to whether or not the barley is Aviv or not. And so there's all these methods of calculating when is the first month of the year, when does that begin, what's the turn of the year, what do all these things mean? And for the most part, I've looked into just about all of those. Okay, so here's what I've come up with. And for me, this is the most solid thing that I found so far. God knew we were going to have a problem with this. So he used his signs in the sun, moon, and stars to let us know when this stuff was going to be happening. And that's what the great sign of Revelation 12 did for us. I think what it did was it helped us be able to confirm what kind of calendar we're using, and also when we're actually going to be in the book of Revelation. So the great sign, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, is in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, we read about a great sign appearing in heaven. The sun is in Virgo, the moon is at her feet. That would be the new crescent moon at her feet. And she's crowned with a crown of, or a garland of 12 stars, which would be the 9 bright stars of Leo right over her head, plus the 3 wandering stars of Mercury, Mars, and Venus. And then it says she was in agony to give birth, and that added an additional star, the planet Jupiter, that went into the womb of Virgo and was in retrograde motion for 9 months. all of those components of the great sign do not show up frequently. And in fact, it's very, very, very rare that all of these components, including the 9-month retrograde motion of Jupiter, that can only occur when Jupiter is in Virgo, and I think that's only every 11 years. And then you have to have all the other planets and the sun and the moon and everything else being in the exact correct space. And that's what happened in September 23rd of 2017. And this just so happened to be right over the Feast of Trumpets that year. So what that tells me is that we're looking at a new moon month, not a full moon beginning of the month, and we're looking at what we would consider the kind of traditional Hebrew calendars that are in use right now. So for me, that great sign actually confirmed basically that we kind of know what the calendar is within a month or so. We're not going to be drifting away from that very much. So to me, the great sign of Revelation 1 and 2 actually put us in the book of Revelation, so we're now in the end times. So the next question that people have asked me is, would it be possible for the rapture to take place during the spring feasts instead of in the fall? Or some people have asked, would it be possible that the 8 days of Hanukkah are part of the story? So I want to address the idea of the spring feasts first. Could the rapture of the male child take place during the spring feasts? Well, I think the odds for that are pretty low, and that's because of the imagery that Revelation 12 gives us about the woman who's in travail. When we're talking about the woman in Revelation chapter 12, we have to understand that Hebraic thought layers a lot of symbols and meanings of symbols on top of each other. The woman is crowned with a garland of 12 stars. The 12 stars represent the 12 tribes of Israel. That's how we know that the woman is Israel and not, say, Mary or somebody else. This is Israel represented by the 12 stars, and this is kind of an allusion back to Joseph's dream of the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him. The second thing that the woman represents is actually the remnant of Israel. She's going to flee into the wilderness, and we know that that will happen at the time of the abomination of desolation or the sixth trumpet in Revelation. The woman also represents the constellation Virgo, and the sun being in Virgo. So the fact that the sun is in Virgo and the woman is in travail, in agony to give birth, gives us the time of year when the male child is going to be born, and that is during the fall feasts, sometime after the Feast of Trumpets in the fall. So it'll be at the end of the agricultural season in Israel. Does it have to be associated with a feast? Not necessarily, but I think the feast where Jesus was born, over the Feast of Tabernacles, is a likely choice for the birth of the male child who's going to rule all nations with a rod of iron. The other 7-day window of time is the one that would immediately precede the fifth trumpet, which would be on the 8th day. And that is associated with Noah going into the ark before the days of Noah begin. And of course, the days of Noah are also associated with those beings who are in the pit, who will be released at the fifth trumpet, who were put into prison at the time of the flood. So there's some imagery there that makes the fall the more likely time for the rapture, the first rapture of the male child to take place. So we had our little window of time for 2024. The window is, as far as I'm concerned right now, I'm going to do a little more research on this. But as far as today goes, the window is closed. And unless there is some real drastic change to my understanding of the great sign of Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, the day counts that I see and the calendar that I'm using is probably the right one, and that's probably not going to change. So another question that people have asked me is, what about the fig tree generation? Are we running out of time? Because according to Psalm 90, I think it's verse 10, the length of someone's life is 70 to 80 years. Okay, that would be a normal lifespan. And I've talked about this in other videos, like at the time Jesus was born, at the time of the Babylonian captivity, there was a generation of people who saw the beginning of it and then saw the end of it. And that happened in 2 generations. It happened with the Babylonian captivity, where there were people who'd seen the first temple, went into captivity, came back, saw the second temple, wept. They were very old men, okay, very old. So, probably into their 80s. And they saw the whole thing. They lived the whole thing. And the same thing is true with the generation of Jesus' day. Could have seen the Bethlehem star, could have seen the wise man coming into Jerusalem, heard about Jesus, saw his miracles, saw Jesus' crucifixion, the big eclipse that took place at the time of his death, heard about the resurrection, the rejection of the Messiah, and then the fulfillment of the Daniel prophecy that says that the Romans would come in and destroy the city and the sanctuary. All of that took place within the lifespan of a person. Someone could have been there for the beginning of the first coming of Christ and seen the whole thing. And the same thing is going to be true with the second coming of Christ. There are people who are going to live to see that fig tree leafing out. That is the regathering of the nation of Israel in unbelief, by the way, in unbelief and in rebellion, who will also see the second coming of Christ and the Jews actually coming to faith in Christ, okay, at his second coming, at his visible return. So there is this window of time that is going to be the period of a person's life. So that is the generation that Jesus said that the people who see the beginning of it are going to see the end of it. So, of course, it would have been really nice if right here at the 80-year mark, that would have, the rapture would have happened and the second coming would have been in 2028, and that would have been really great. But we're moving into the 81st year, and it's possible, I suppose, this could go another 2 years, though I highly doubt it. We're still within the a modern lifespan. Then there are people who say, Brenda, you just need to throw that all away and start over again. We just need to start over from scratch. Your template is wrong. You don't really know what you're doing. And to that I say, well, you know what? I could be wrong. I could be. But there's enough confirmation within that template itself that lets me know that the fundamentals are correct. There's so much coincidences that happen with the feast days and with the prophecies of the Exodus. The fundamentals of my timeline are actually pretty solid, I think. There are things where I all of a sudden will go, well, wait a minute, Brenda, I don't think that's right. I think you got that one wrong, and I'll rethink something and I'll tweak it. But it never has made any drastic changes in the template itself. That's all stayed like pretty much the same for a long time now. So there's just little places where we've made just, little moves, little tiny changes, but there's nothing big here at all. And really, that's to be expected. I would hope that as we are studying things pertaining to the end times, that the Lord would be opening this up for us, and that we would see the places where we thought we knew something, and then we find out, well, we didn't really know. Well, things like, like people who are still believing in a 7-year tribulation, that it's the Antichrist who's confirming a covenant, when there is so much evidence to show that that is not the case at all. And actually, when I get into my Passover prophecy series, we're going to find some very interesting confirmation for how Jesus is the one who confirms the covenant with his 3.5-year ministry. Is really amazing. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, is the Passover prophecy. I learned so much in the Day of Atonement prophecy and in the Feast of Tabernacles prophecy. and how the fulfillments of those prophecies layer over one another and basically give us sort of a big three-dimensional view of who Christ is and how he is the fulfillment of multiple layers of prophecy. It's so amazing, and it's just really, really wonderful to be digging into these things. So I hope you'll be watching for the Passover prophecy. I'm hoping to get the first few videos in that series uploaded soon. So now the question is this. So what do we do now? Well, we do what we do every year. We're going to persevere and endure. We're just going to take it one day at a time. We know that the Lord is with us. We know that we can go to him with every need that we have. We know we have brothers and sisters in the Lord who are going to encourage us and to help support us in prayer and to be an encouragement. We all need encouragement as we go along. I mean, even I need encouragement to keep on keeping on, because the days are going to be getting darker. And somebody asked me a while back, so Brenda, what if our rapture doesn't happen in 2024? I'm like, well, eek. I think we're going to be headed in for some really, really rough times. And I think that's the truth. I think we're going to be headed into some of the worst times in human history. We're going to be watching things take place that would have never crossed our minds, 5 years ago. We're going to be heading into some rough waters. Just batten down those hatches. This is all part of your training to be a ruler with Christ, to rule with him as a joint heir over all of his creation, over which God has appointed him the heir of everything. And Christ is going to share that with us. The book of Hebrews tells us that anyone who is going to have this kind of sonship, this inheritance, has to submit to training. They have to. And training is not pleasant. It just isn't. But we need to submit to it anyway if you want to rule and reign with Christ. And we do this by faith. This is a faith adventure. It's been a faith venture from the day you got born again, and it's going to continue to be a faith venture. It's a faith journey, and ultimately it will end in our rapture, which is also by faith. Remember, Enoch was raptured by faith. We're trained to be sons, and so we're called to perseverance, to patience, to endurance, to love of the brethren, to humility, to kindness and generosity, to displaying the fruit of the Spirit in our life, to prefer one another, to build each other up as believers. Sometimes this stuff is hard, but nobody said it was going to be easy. That's the thing. And in fact, Jesus said, you got to count the cost. Who of you, desiring to build a tower, won't first sit down and count whether he has enough money to finish it? And what king is there who sees another king coming at him with more army, doesn't sit down and go, you know what, I think I might need to make peace with that person rather than going to war against them? So there is a counting of the cost, and I think every one of us needs to do that periodically and just say, you know what, am I willing to count it all loss for the sake of knowing Christ? Okay, and I hope the answer to that is going to be yes. The rapture window for this year, as far as I'm concerned, right now, anyway, unless something new comes on my radar, it's closed, and we're going to have to wait until next fall. And what my team is going to be doing is putting in dates for a 2029 second coming of Christ, with the first rapture taking place in the fall of 2025. I know I've probably mentioned this in a video, but it's probably been a really long time ago, probably a few years now. But I had just a moment. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't a dream, but there was this, maybe it was a vision, I don't know. Anyway, the thing is that I saw basically the collapse before the rapture would take place. There was a big collapse before what we would call the end. And I also had another, this was a real vision, I was awake for it, of China invading Taiwan, and then Jesus comes. Okay, so that Jesus wouldn't come for us until after that had happened. But this feeling of doom, this incredible collapse, and the rug being pulled out basically from under the United States, and that basically we would be that first domino that would fall, and that once we were taken down, it would go to other parts of the world, and that it would be the end of the United States. And that's why Israel would be all alone in the end times. That was part of the reason for Israel being abandoned during the end, that the U.S. had basically collapsed. So I know there are people who are thinking that we've been given a reprieve because of the new administration that's coming in, but that doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. If anything, what it does is it polarizes the U.S. even more. And so it's all going according to plan. It's all running according to schedule. And I think that we should probably prepare ourselves for the worst for this coming year. That does not mean we despair. It means we persevere, we endure, we pray for one another, we help each other out, and we just give our life over to the Lord and just let him do what he's going to do in our life. So anyway, I know that probably isn't what everybody wanted to hear, but it's my opinion, it's my thinking. And you don't have to agree with me, and you don't have to believe anything I say. In fact, I really do hope that you do your own research and that you dive into the Word yourself and ask some of these questions and, see what the Lord shares with you. So until the next video, I pray you have a very, very blessed day. And you can do this.